Welcome everybody. I am Toby Lewis from Logitech, and we're going to spend the next kind of 25 minutes-ish talking about what is a meeting space. So what does that actually mean? As the best way to always start in an executive meeting is to show your summary first. So I'll tell you what, we'll start with the conclusions that we're going to have through this little rambling chat that we're going to have here. I hope it will be relatively entertaining for you guys. We all know what technology webinars are like. The conclusions are that video becomes ubiquitous in the next few years. And we already kind of think that there's a lot of video around now, but, genuinely as a team at Logitech, we think it's just going to be, it's going to get more popular. It's going to be in more places, and it's going to just end up everywhere in what the next version of our working life looks like. So we think that work's going to end up being reimagined. Necessarily the pandemic has taught us an amazing amount of things, and we think that there's going to have to be a shift that goes along with that. Inside that, there's going to be opportunities and there's going to be threats. So, what are they? What are they going to look like? And there is no single answer. Anybody that tells you that there's one answer to something, they're either slightly delusional or possibly lying, and we still don't know what the next stage in the next year or so is going to look like. So we've got a real eye on our customers and the people that surround us and what's going on. So I'm just going to try and impart some of the things that we've gone through for you. And the one thing, if there was one answer, we think that one answer could be reinvention. It really means we're going to have to look at how we operate and what we do and the things that are going on with us. So as a team with inside Logitech, we have this question that we ask ourselves, and that is, what happens when distance equals 0? So before we get into that, I really suppose I should tell you who I am, because I could speak to you for the next half an hour or so. But until I explain who I am and what I'm doing, there's probably no authority behind that. I may still have no authority once you know who I am, but at least you've seen that. So I'm Toby Lewis. I'm part of the collaboration strategy team here at Logitech. And what that means is that we do a lot of the sales enablement and actually the customer-facing business strategy. So we teach our sales guys all the things that you need to know about the projects and the products that Logitech do. We teach them the things that we learn in the industry. We teach them the things that we learn in front of customers, in front of product teams, in front of the people that we do beta and alpha testing to. And we give them as much as we can our insight into the things that we're learning. So we talk to the analysts a lot, and we tell them what we think, they tell us what they're hearing in the market, and we both reflect back to each other. And those are the kind of things that we take back to our sales teams to try and keep them abreast of what we see from an enablement side is actually going on. So we talked about reinvention. So let's talk about what is actually going on. And what we really know is that the future isn't actually going to be what we thought it was going to be. Most views of the future, every time you look at science fiction, it is all about what our current society looks like with a bit of a change. And what was that going to look like? If it carried on like it was going 18 months ago, what was that going to look like? It was going to look like more roads. It was going to look like more travel-ins. It was going to look like more roadside places to stay. It was going to look like more planes in the air. It was just going to look like more travel. And actually, the future not looking like that, I personally think that's a bit of a great thing. And that comes from a man that maybe spent a third of the year away from home. The amount of time I spent circling myself around these tarmac loops was astonishing. The amount of time I spent away from my home, maybe 100 days out of the 350 in 2019. The last year's been quite amazing, quite frankly. And, that future, what was it going to look like if we carried on the same way we were carrying on? It was just going to end up with more of this tarmac. It was going to end up with more of those planes. There's a statistic that says that at any one time in 2019, there were 6,000 aircraft in the air above North America. Is that, or was that, sustainable? So what does it look like? If the future doesn't look like exactly what we thought it was going to look like, what does it look like? Who and where are we going to take it? Does it mean everybody is going to be back in the office? Potentially not. Potentially for some. If you're Goldman Sachs, yes, it means that you're going to be back in the office. That's the company mandate that they've had. Everybody needs to be back in the office for Goldman Sachs as soon as they possibly can be. But let's take the Silicon Valleys. Let's take the startups that we've got out there. Slack, for instance, they're going to do away with all of their offices. Everybody for them is going to be working at home. Everybody is going to be working at home, and they'll have spaces where people can get together when they're not at home. But for most of us, it doesn't look like either one of those two things. It really looks like balance between those two things for the rest of us. But what does that balance mean? Does it mean 10% at home, 10% in the office, or which way round? So we've been doing a lot of research in and around this. And actually, this is a bit of an eye chart, and I'll leave this up there while I'm talking. But we did some research into this actually not long after the pandemic started, and we started asking people, a lot of people who'd gone home for the first time or started working from home for the first time, what this all actually meant for them. And this was a year ago. We're just about to go back in and do this survey again to see what that actually means. And the survey suggested that 80% would actually benefit from some time working from home. But actually, there were still quite a lot of people that didn't like exactly the always working from home. They thought that they needed a certain amount of time in the office to do a certain amount of things. They thought they felt like there were things that they could only get done in the office. And, then we started talking about, obviously, we're here with Logitech. There's a lot of video that's got to be involved in this. So they started talking about what they could do, whether people would benefit from more training to be at home with VC. We all literally scattered to the wings, didn't we, a year ago? The pandemic hit, everything closed down. We were all sent home, and you've got to love your IT teams, no matter what has been going on in the last year. The amount of work that those IT teams have gone through to get everybody at home connected back to the office has been extreme. But a lot of people actually said, we could still really do with a lot more training for VC. We could do with a lot more training of what that actually means for us. And a lot of people, as they actually came through this, so you'll see the very final stat, which is 23% felt that they needed the office for collaboration. And actually, interestingly enough, we know that number has gone up quite considerably over the last 3 months, definitely, as people have been coming towards the end of pretty much a year in isolation. So what are some of those other stats actually say that we've got? So if you believe the stats that are out there, actually it runs almost on a 30%. On the global surveys, we're seeing that 30% roughly are going to go back to the office pretty much full time. 30% are going to go and end up working at home full time. But actually the split in the middle is about 30-30. And, still when we say home full time, what we probably mean is, there still might be 1 day a week every couple of weeks in the office. It's not going to preclude you from ever going to the office. And we did this survey actually around, you can see here, around the different types of people that thought what they would like to do and where they would like to spend their time. And Actually, we didn't just look at which kind of people wanted to spend time. We actually looked at what meetings actually meant. So it was a really interesting piece around the emotional content of meetings and what people perceived meetings to be as. So interestingly, Gen Z, your latest generation, um, they actually perceive meetings as an upload-download experience. They expect to walk into a room, they expect a lot of information to come to them. And as juniors, they expect themselves to give a small of information back in. And honestly, that's what they think meetings are. And the emotional content of those meetings is very low. It's a very functional thing to do. And we started looking as well at collaboration meetings, as interestingly as you get into your 30s, as you start getting more experienced and you start getting much more creative, and in your 30s, you're much more confident with how your work or how you are in your work. So a lot of collaboration and ideation and innovation comes from people in their 30s who are confident and comfortable in the position that they're in. And the emotional content of those collaboration meetings goes up some, but it's still a very design-led. There was a lot of research actually that said that the arrogance level of a collaboration meeting is probably the highest. But that's because there's a lot of people with really, they've got great ideas and they want to bring them forwards and they want to be a part of that. And then actually the emotional content goes up actually as people get older as well. As you hit your 40s and 50s, social interactions within those meeting spaces becomes really important to you. Really knowing the colleagues that are around you and being able to understand as you shift into more kind of senior management roles, the emotional level of understanding the people that you work with and you work for and who work for you becomes really important to you. So, we've been looking not as a product team within Logitech, we've not just been looking at what technology moves with this, but we've really been looking at how those people interact within those meetings. So, quick statement here. There is nothing more dangerous than a person with only one right answer. So that means that their view is really, really closed. And you can see from that last slide that we've tried to take into account in our thinking and the things that we think and the way we're predicting, because we are predicting what's going to happen in the next year. And so we've got to really keep an open mind. So anybody that tells you there is only one right answer, just be aware and think as much as you can. So, what is the next normal gonna be? Is it gonna be empty cities? No, probably not. There's still a lot of office space there. The office might well morph slightly, but it's not going to be empty cities. That's what cities are geared up for. They're geared up for high populations of people. But, we do see a bit of a downturn within that. Is everybody going to have that $4,000 a month loft apartment that's the closest thing they can find to the office, when actually it turns out they're not going into the office that much? Is everybody moving to the suburbs? Actually, we can see in the UK especially that there are a number of people, or housing within the city is going down, but housing in the suburbs, inside or just outside the M25 is actually becoming way more popular. Everybody moving to this countryside. As you can see, I'm afflicted with some very old building things here. I am in Gloucestershire, which is in the heart of the Cotswolds. So actually, my front door pretty much looks like this. In fact, that might even be my neighbour over there having a beer. But is everybody moving out to the country? No, not at the moment, because actually you go out into the way more rural areas, and what you still need is that information flow. So you can't move that far out yet, but not yet. But SpaceX, the new space internet that they have, for some reason right now while I'm doing this presentation, I've completely forgotten the name of the Sky Internet thing that they're doing. You can go off and Google that yourselves. But it means that people in those really rural areas are going to have the fastest internet like the rest of us. It's not going to be judged on where they are based on how many cables can get to them. So that does mean that the spread of people can work out and it can go around. So that's us talking about types of meetings that we have. We've talked briefly about where people can be and where they might end up over the next couple of years. But let's talk about work. What actually is work? So when we come to define how people meet and how people work together, knowing what work is really important. And you know, one of the biggest things that I know from this last year is that if we talk about work and hybrid work, we're not talking about hybrid work. We're talking about hybrid meetings, because that is the thing that's happening. People can still get on with their work wherever it is. What we're looking at with hybrid workplace is how people meet together when they're in different places. So it's always interesting to go back and look and see what the office was for. So the office, let's take it all the way back to the 18th century. The office was essentially, it was invented in the UK. It was invented in Britain. The Industrial Revolution happened in Britain. And what actually happened is the office was the paperworks. It was the administration for the factory. And it was always built on top of the factory. So the factory produced all the paper or the cloth or all of that. But everybody's desks were actually up on top of that factory. They were treated like factory workers. They clocked in and clocked out. They were put on an hourly rate. But does that actually look like us anymore? As most of the people that are going to be on this call, we're knowledge workers. Do we really sit in that factory environment being charging ourselves out on an hourly rate to only work in the office, to only work specifically in that one place? You know, we as a team really base ourselves on results, not the actual activity that we're doing. So what is the office for anyway? What is the office for now? And actually, a huge part of that is being part of something bigger. As humans, we really like to be part of something bigger. We operate, we're more efficient. We operate better when we're actually part of a big group. And part of being that big group is mentoring. You know, one thing that we've really seen from teams is that when they're not in the office, actually the younger groups, the really smart ones coming up, they're missing the interaction that they're having with the senior teams. They're gauging how these people act and how they react and how they can make themselves better in their future of work. We're also seeing that a lot of creative teams are actually having a lot harder time. You know, we've heard from ad agencies and creative places that that their teams are getting on functionally, but actually their levels of creativity and the ideas that they usually get have dropped down, because all these ideas usually come from people being crowded in together. Creative ideas usually come from more than one person at a time, and those ideas are sparking less because people are spending less time in a room together. But, you know, what do we believe that office is going to look like? We genuinely think this is probably done, this permanent, everybody coming into the office and Janet having her own desk that she always sits at and Bob being next to her. You know, we don't think that is going to be such a thing. And what about the executive office? You know, much to the chagrin of a lot of senior leadership teams recently, the executive offices have been moving out. They've been moved out into the main floor with everybody else on an open desk policy or an open floor policy, and smaller meeting rooms for people to meet in have become something much more prevalent in offices. And actually, what we're seeing with that executive room in the last year is it's moved home. You know, look at me here. I have this lovely office where I can actually work on my own in the quiet, which is what used to happen with that executive office. And we see so many more people gearing up to be permanently from home for their executive office, and they'll go into the office when they need some more ideation, where they need to actually get involved with some more people. So who does what? Those meeting spaces that we're talking about, who does what and where do they happen? Well, buying and selling, sales guys are really face to face. So this is all about the personalities and where those personalities meet. Sales guys are face to face, and quite frankly, if they don't like people, then they've probably chosen the wrong career to be in. Sales guys are really looking forward, and I speak to ours all the time. They're chomping at the bit to get back out there and be in front of their customers. But necessarily, do their customers really want them to be in the offices with them as well? This really comes into something like productivity. So, self-reported before the pandemic there was a survey done where sales teams were self-reporting 6 customer meets a week, and that's self-reported. What we're actually seeing with video is, but so much of that space and time was taken up sitting on the motorways, the freeways, sitting in the planes, waiting in people's offices. The amount of time you actually spent with your customer was low, because you could spend over 1/3 of your day just trying to get somewhere. And what we've actually seen from our own sales teams is that suddenly they're doing 4 to 5 to almost 6 customer meetings a day. And we can absolutely argue that those customer meetings are not as successful as those individual ones that they were doing face to face. Or sometimes we can argue they are more successful based on what they are. But what it actually means is our sales guys are getting in front of so many more people. The productivity that they actually have is higher. And our sales guys are now saying that they're qualifying things much better remotely to be able to go in and have a much more focused meeting with those people. And people are everywhere. All of a sudden, sales guys that had patches, companies that had patches, we operate here in the northwest of England, or we operate in London. Suddenly that's not such a thing. The distance has become 0. You don't need, as a specialist, to only operate within the area that you can reach easily within a day. Being able to take your meetings virtual has meant that actually the meetings and the businesses and those people go global. Your customers are everywhere, but actually it also does mean that your competitors are everywhere as well. They have the same ability as you to get in front of people, to have that ability to meet and to have that ability to do things virtually. It actually brings up questions as to how the businesses just get more niche to be able to get through these situations. So what do we do? What do we do now? What do we do with those meeting spaces? So we talked about the fact that there's there's personalities involved, there's types of people who like to meet, there's places people like to meet, there's distance that you go if you were trying to meet. Well, let's not beat around the bush. You're listening to me talking about Logitech. So we genuinely believe that one of the best ways to get across hybrid meeting places to make sure that video is everywhere. Be totally unsurprised to hear that that's one of the things that we think, but genuinely that's what we think, because we said there's no one answer. But one thing that I can tell you is that I think at least for the next 2 to 4 years, what you're going to be able to guarantee is that if you've got a meeting with 10 people, not all 10 of them are going to be able to be in that single room. So you've got to make sure that you're enabled for those people that are out of that meeting space that you're in to be able to come to you. And, no matter where they are, video is everywhere. Even for schools, for designers, for everything. Video is now getting everywhere. It's been a science experiment for the last 20 years. I have been in video for 20 years. I've been watching it never get above the early adopters curve, and now we are above the early adopters curve. And actually, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are sub 10-year-old or sub teenagers. They're just used to video, and the last year has only programmed that even harder into them. So video everywhere. So how do we manage those meeting spaces, and what do we think about those meeting spaces? Now, obviously you're here and this is Logitech, but I'm not here to give you a product demo or anything like that. I genuinely hate sales pitches coming down on webinars. You can talk to any one of our sales guys if these things make you interested. All I want to do is say that meeting spaces need to be collaborative. There is a lot of work that needs to be done on them. And I think, this is only a subset. I can't give you any answers here, but what I can tell you is that as we go forward, we particularly are going to be watching exactly what happens when people go back into the offices and they start interacting with all of these technologies and then suddenly go, oh, it's actually not as good as when I was at home. Some of these things need to be fixed. We've got a lot of teams coming to us and going, oh my God, how do we video enable 20% of our spaces? We absolutely need it. So let me give you an idea of what we think we should be doing with video spaces from a complete, if you're thinking about enabling a video space, think about these things. People always come to us and say, we're price sensitive. Okay, well, price sensitive is an odd thing. What does that actually mean? Make sure that the systems are affordable. If you go out and spend £1 million on something, if somebody else doesn't have that £1 million something as well to connect, has any of it been valuable? What we mean by affordable is, we all spend money on furniture that goes into that rooms. Make sure that the system that you're putting in video-wise, think about the budget for the furniture. Make it the same roughly as the budget for the furniture that you've got going in that room. You'll be surprised how quickly chairs can mount up at £600 a piece. What we also really need to think about is reliable. And we don't talk about technology reliability these days. We're not talking about chipsets blowing up, batteries running out, or the magic smoke escaping from your piece of technology. That's not really a thing that we talk about so much here. What we really mean to talk about is we mean to talk about things that users can get anywhere near, cables, stuff like that. Power supplies. How many times have you walked into a room and something's been unplugged and it doesn't work? And it's not the system's fault. That was the last guy that was in the room unplugging it. Really think about how reliable your systems are when you get into that room. Make sure that your customers cannot reconfigure them as they go, because users, right? We all know users. The first thing that they'll do when they walk into that room late, slightly huffing, having run down the corridor, is look for a place to plug in their iPhones. And if they can charge their iPhone on something that they've unplugged, then they'll just do it. And that goes for everything. Just make sure when you make a room, make sure cables don't fall out. Make sure that your technology, that whatever technology you're putting in that room is, just make sure it stays connected and your IT teams don't have to run around trying desperately to fix it. Make sure your user interface is consistent as well. There's an amazing thing about teaching users. We all know what our cars are like. We can pretty much all hop into anybody else's car. The pedals are in the same place. The steering wheel's in the same place. Sometimes with your Japanese and your German cars, your indicator's in the wrong place. And people don't understand when I've squirted my windscreen that I was actually flashing for them to come out of the junction. But hey, that's my problem, having a German and a Japanese car in the family. But there's a thing with users is there's one thing that they talk about, and the fact that public embarrassment is higher up on the list of things to be scared of than death. And if you hand somebody a remote control in a room, they're instantly going to think if they press the wrong button that the room's going to explode and all their clothes are going to fall off, and they'll be totally embarrassed in front of their teams, which is really odd because that almost never happens. So make sure that you have a sensible system where if somebody goes from one room to another, they're not going to be scared by what's in that room. It's something they've seen before. Make sure it's scalable. Make sure when you put these things in that there's more than enough to go round in the business. Don't just have 2 rooms that people can never book. Make sure there's enough in there for everybody to be able to use, and that it is easy for your teams to deploy at scale. We'd love to say that everybody has exactly the same meeting rooms, but nobody does. There's always small, medium, and large meeting rooms. Make sure when you're looking at it that you're looking at a vendor that offers something that goes in each one of those spaces. Don't mix and match technologies between spaces, because the user experience won't be consistent, and your users, again, will be frightened of it, and the usage of it will be less. Make sure it's flexible. Even if you're let's say a Teams house, there'll be a user that runs into a room and goes, "Oh my Lord, how do I join a WebEx meeting?" Make sure they have the ability to be able to do that simply and easily. Single cable, something that means that they can join that meeting again without being afraid. Hey, let's talk about the other technologies in the room. Look at those technologies that you've got in that room. What is efficient for you? Maybe even down to your whiteboard. How do you include your whiteboard into that video meeting that you're having? Flexibility really means as well, it means interacting nicely and playing nicely with the other children in the playground. Think about it. Look at that system that you're looking at. Make sure that when you're looking at it, your reliability sits with flexibility as well. Manageable. We're all here from enterprise and from larger business. Don't buy something that you can't operate remotely. As we go into this whole disparate hybrid working space, IT teams are going to be looking at least 30% of their people not being in the office. Make sure that those 30% don't have to travel to somewhere to have things fixed, or that your IT team can instantly help them with remotely. We think that's really important, because there's really going to be a transformation of IT through this. Your IT teams are going to have to deal with as much relocation and change as the rest of us are, more so, in fact. That beautiful cafe IT bar that's in the office was a really lovely idea, but if 30% of the workforce are going to be working from home and the IT guys just say, "Hey, come in and have a coffee and we'll fix it while you stand with us," that person you're talking to might not be set to come into the office for 3 or 4 months. There's thoughts about how this works and what happens with it. So, as we say, there's no one right answer. And as a team, we are just looking at when the facts change your mind. That's how we operate. It's how we're trying to operate. And you know what? As you're trying things through this, try things. Keep with your users, keep on top of your users. And if you go so far through a project and it isn't working, let it die. Let the project die. Get on with something else that works. As we said, let the selfish meme decide. If a project doesn't work, let it die. Speak to your users and try something different. And with that, I shall leave you. I won't leave you, but we're here to have some Q&As. We'll put our contact details in there. You can see contact *******. We'll have our contact details sent out with all the recordings for this, because there are a couple of us here answering your questions as we go. And we'll make sure that if you want to talk to us, then you can talk to the right person to help you. And with that, I'll say thank you, and we'll see you later.